Hello, I'm Rachel from Echidna Sewing, and today I'm going to show you how to applique with your sewing machine. I really love applique. It's one of my favourite sewing techniques to do, and we are going to be creating some designs from our Chrissy Spirit machine applique pattern. We are going to draw, cut and stitch using some of my favourite methods, stitches and techniques. If you're not sure what the term applique means, it is a French term for layered fabric, or laying fabric on top of each other. And that is exactly what we're going to do today. There are many options available to you for applique, and you might know some of them as needle turn applique, turned edge applique, fused applique, raw edge applique. There's lots. Today I'm working with fuse applique, which is using a fusible webbing to adhere to the back of the fabric and iron it onto the background, and we'll also be stitching and doing some raw edge applique. Here's a fun fact for you. Did you know that before the sewing machine was invented, applique was done by hand? No, if you're like me, you don't have enough hours in the day to do it by hand. That's why I'm really looking forward to showing you some of my favourite stitches and techniques to create amazing pictures. So here are some of the materials that I've used to construct my applique blocks. I've used some glitter sheets. I've got a variety of scissors. These are for cutting out my applique. I have a fabric scissor and a paper scissor. I have a variety of fabrics and some embellishments. I'm using Hemingworth threads, and because of that I'll be using one of the pre-wound bobbins in my machine. I've also got these little rulers, and you're thinking, wow, what do you use those for? Well, I'm going to show you how to do that today. My rotary cutter in case I need to cut some things up from my fabric to make it smaller. Some felt, fusible webbing, Softway tearaway. The 1800Q sewing machine. It has the most amazing amount of decorative stitches and some of my favourites, including the whiskers stitch. All will be revealed soon. My mini iron, and of course the mat that goes with it. You will also need your Chrissy Spirit applique pattern. On the first page you can see there is a variety of characters available in the pattern. You will need to print these out so that you can stitch along with me. The applique design that we're going to start working with will be the Christmas tree, but before we start on that design I want to talk to you a little bit about your machine applique patterns. So the front sheet always includes the designs that's included in the pack, and then as we go through the pages you can see with the reindeer, I'll put these two, this one here, the pattern has already been reversed for you, so you can just trace it straight onto the fusible web. The best picture probably for me to show that to you would be ho ho ho. So this is the front sheet to show you how it will be laid out, but this is the tracing sheet. You can see the H and the O's are reversed for you so that when you trace your design onto your fusible webbing and iron it onto your fabric, it will be the right side facing. So let me pop that aside. So with this design, I shall put this here. This is the shape, the 1, 2, 3 shapes I need to create the Christmas tree. So when I'm working with applique, I cut my fusible webbing, as you can see, to the size of the design or the sheet that I'm working with. That way it's manageable and you won't have any problems with the fusible webbing peeling away from the paper. I have to give our hot melt web a special mention here because it is incredible as a fusible web, and I've been using it for many years, but the paper is slightly heavier than say other fusible webs that's on the market, and because it's in a smaller roll it doesn't tend to peel away and it's easy for storage. And I don't know if you're like me and you like to cut your fusible web down to manageable sizes, that is what this makes it easy to do. So the other things I have for this is my fusible webbing, my background fabric, which is my background square, that's what I'm ironing it onto. And this is my background square that's folded, so I know the centre, and that's for me for placement. I also have my tree fabric and my tree trunk. I have my paper scissors and my fabric scissors because I'm going to use both of these. The other thing that I'm going to use is my pencil and these really small, cool rulers. So I usually carry this one in my pencil case and it's with me all the time. This one's at home in my stash. And this is so that I can draw straight lines when I am creating applique designs. And because it's smaller and easier to manage, I'm not using a large ruler or navigating with a large ruler on my paper. The other thing I'm using today is my light box, which I'm going to use to trace, and I'll be using the mini iron and pressing mat. So it's pretty easy. You don't have to use a light box, but it just makes it a little bit quicker. And so what I'm going to do is lay my fusible web sheet over the top of my design, and you can see here my Christmas tree through it. And now it's time to trace. So I grab my pencil and I usually press a dot here and a dot here. That enables me to line up my straight lines quickly. I do the same thing on the other side. So it gives me my starting and my end point because my tree has round ends, and I'll do this one on the bottom. I like to use a ruler with straight lines because I can get a bit shaky, especially if they're long. So for the tree trunk, I have some dotted lines, and that is because on the applique pattern, the dotted lines means this part of the trunk is nested under another fabric. In this case, it's under the tree. So when I draw this onto the fusible web, I do put the dotted lines as well so that I know. And then it's a slight curve. And then I shall put these curves of the tree in. And that's moved slightly, so I'll just put that in. And then the last thing to trace is my star. I can't find my small ruler, so we'll go with the large. And again, the ruler does give me perfect straight lines. You don't have to do this, but I think you get a better result. And this ruler is really easy to manage the design with. And those are my 3 shapes traced. One thing that you could do if you wanted to be more economical with your paper is I could have taken the star and drawn it down here, and then it would have freed me up with other pieces of fusible webbing that I can use later. But I'm happy with that, so I'll turn this off, set that aside. I won't need the light box again. The next step for applique is to use the correct paper scissors, and we're going to cut around our shapes. Now I cut about 1/8 of an inch around the outside. You're not cutting on the line yet. We will do that in the next step. But what we're doing is we're separating our fusible webbing elements so we can use our different fabrics and textures to create the applique. I've made a lot of applique quilts, and sometimes this is the most time-consuming process because you can have small parts which take a lot of cutting. So the star obviously will take much longer than the tree and the trunk. So for this one, I'm just going to cut in like this. Just the important part is getting that shape of the edge, that gap between the drawn design and the fusible webbing. Okay, so we have 3 designs traced onto our fusible webbing, 1, 2, 3, and each element has a different fabric. So my tree trunk here is using brown felt. My tree is using this beautiful lime colour, and my blue star is using the glitter sheet, the blue glitter sheet. So I'll grab that and show you how to do that in a moment. So I'll just put this one aside. The thing about applique is you need to know the right side and the wrong side of your fabric, which obviously for a felt, there's no right side and wrong side essentially. So we'll start with this one because it's the easiest. I'll grab my wall pressing mat. The next step is to fuse the design onto the felt. So I'll place in the centre, make sure it's warm enough, and then I'm just going to iron using a circular motion to fuse the shape onto my felt. That's one. The next part, I'm going to, got some threads here, I'm just going to trim those off because I don't want them to get in my design. Be ironed into the back, and then I've turned my fabric to the wrong side. Just make sure there's no wrinkles, give that another. I'm going to conserve fabric, so I'm going to place this guy here like this. So, and I've done this so that you can see I have that white extra from the drawn line, and that is actually, this time I'll be cutting on the cutting line, which is the pencil line. So it doesn't matter if it's that close to the edge. So again, place the template, the fusible webbing, and using circular motion, iron in place. The bigger design, it might take a little longer. It's quite warm to touch, but it does cool down quickly. Now, we're going to take our fabric scissors, we're going to cut directly on the line, including the dotted line. So, this is where you have to be a little bit more accurate, because this is the part that will be shown. That's my tree trunk, and here's my tree form. So you can see on the parts that I've cut out that I have some fusible web adhered to my fabric. I'm actually going to cut these out and use these scraps for testing. This is one of my tips. When I am starting to sew, I always audition my stitches, and to do that I don't want to put it on my block. So I cut out these shapes and glue them to a piece of fabric and stitch them onto there. And I'll use this for my test. So I'll keep those in that. And I might keep some of this because I'll simply peel the back off and I can stick that down with that little edge. And these are just for a test. It doesn't have to be perfect, but it's just good to do this now before we start stitching. So I need some fabric. I'm not going to do the star until we start to embellish, which will be after we've completed all our blocks. So the next step for me is to take these elements that I've finished here, peel the paper off, so the paper easily comes away and reveals the glue, the fusible webbing. And then same with this one. You can see how heavy that paper is, which is why it works so well for applique. Then I have already ironed my background square. This is so that I can find out where my tree will go. I mean, you could put the tree here if you want to, or on point, that's called on point. But I like my tree to be in the middle of my block and my trunk. Now you know that I don't have the star complete yet, and this is where this piece comes in because I'll put it up there and I'll go, oh, it's too high up. So what I'm looking at is how high this is from the edge, so it needs a repositioning further down. And this will go on. I think that's probably the correct position. And then I have a look. I mean, we could use the ruler and measure. That's 4 3/4. And that is a fraction off 4 3/4. So if I go over a millimetre, that's about centre. So I'm happy with that. I'm going to iron it in place. I will just peel back my tree and apply some heat here. This is a useful place to use an applique mat if you need one, if you have one. And then the next part, just reposition the tree and iron it on top. So I do this on the front first, then I flip it over, and I iron it onto the back. And that's our block ready to stitch. The machine's set up and we're ready to start stitching, but before we begin I want to talk to you about thread. I'm using Hemingworth embroidery thread, and you can see that lime is the perfect match for my fabric, and up here I am using a beige for the trunk. That's the first thing I've done. The other thing I mentioned at the beginning was I have my test strips of offcuts. So this is essentially what I've done. I've just peeled back the paper layer, put that on, I'll give it an iron, and I'm going to use these scraps to audition my stitches before I stitch on my masterpiece. So I'll just quickly do this one. And that should give me a few options if I want to test a few stitches. If I wasn't sure, I might want to try a blanket stitch, or my favourite whisker stitch, or my straight stitch. I will always test on here before I stitch on here for every single time. The other thing that I have included is my Softway. We didn't talk about this at the beginning, but Softway is a stabilizer that I use to help the stitch form when I'm creating applique, and then it's actually Softway / tearaway, and we just tear it off the back once the block is finished, but it really does assist with a beautiful stitch formation. So I have this ready on my test sample. I also have at the back of my tree ready to go. So I'm not ready for this yet, so I'll just pop that aside, but I do know I have to go around the trunk, and I think I'm pretty much going to use a straight stitch for this. So to do that, I've got my hemmingware thread on. I just pull that through a little. I like a longer stitch length when I'm appliquing, and this is what we would call a raw edge applique, so I'm going to take that up to 3, and I'm going to test how my machine sews. So the reason that I do this is, 1, so I can see it's the right stitch that I'm selecting for the shape and the fabric, and 2, that my machine is stitching properly. So I shall start here. I'm going to go slow for you, and the great thing about the 1800Q, and this is why I love it as well, not only does it have scissors, but it also has a function where you can tell it to stop with needle down, which is what you need for applique. So I'm trying to drive straight along the edge, which is a bit tricky for the sample because my fabric's cut crookedly, but I can see that is stitching beautifully. So I'm just going to stop it there, going to cut and have a look. I'll inspect the stitch and see if that's... I do like that stitch, but now I'm wondering if I could have a bold look. So I'm going to select number 5, which is a triple stitch in my utilities menu. So it has changed my positioning of my needle to left needle position, and it's reduced the stitch length, but I think this will look better for my tree. So I'm going to start, actually I'm just going to start on the top part here and see if this is a better stitch for me to work with. And I will do this with every single shape for every applique block that I'm stitching. Have a look. So you can see with these 2 stitches that I've auditioned, this is more bold and this is softer. So I think that this is too short as a stitch length. I'm going to put that on 4. I like the look, but I want to change my length because I think that will look better for my tree trunk. Yeah, and also you can see it's actually stitching easier with this type of stitch. Okay, so you can see the difference here. This is at 4 millimeters, this is at 3 millimeters, and that was just a straight stitch at 3 millimeters. This is a triple stitch. So the other thing that I do as a reference tool is I will write on here which stitch number it is. So I would write number 5, and I've increased to 4 millimeters. For this one, I would write stitch number 5 again, and it's 3 millimeters. And that's so, because I often keep these, if I want to look back at it, I know what changes I made and what I was stitching. And this one, I would just put standard straight, and again 3 millimeters. Okay, So the trunk is ready to stitch, and I'm going to start on this side and sew down here, around here and along. I have my Softway on the back, and my triple stitch is at 4. My needle position is center. I'm going to start right on the edge of the trunk at the top, and I will lock first, and we'll move forward really slowly. And I'm stopping and pivoting, turning the block around under here, and I've just folded it up slightly so it's easier to handle. Put that down again. And I'm stitching about 1/8 of an inch from the edge of the trunk or the felt. I've stopped just prior to the corner, and once again I'll turn my applique around and start again. I'm nearly at the end, so I've locked my last stitch into place, cut, and I'll trim that. That's step 1 completed. Okay, so the next thing we need to do is stitch the tree. So I need to thread with my green thread, so I shall put that on first. These spool caps are great because it just grabs the thread instead of me having to wind it in. And the tree will use a different stitch. I could use a blanket stitch if I wanted to. So I might have a look at that stitch first, and again I will audition it on my test fabric here, because this is the last part of the applique, and the decorative stitch here will go over the top of the trunk and all the way around, and then finally the star will go on top. So I have several options on this machine of what stitches I can use, and probably a common stitch for applique would be a blanket stitch. It's probably the oldest and best well-known stitch, so we might try number 8. So I'll just go to I'm going to try stitch number 8, which is my blanket stitch. So we'll just use this sample piece of fabric and see how it stitches and whether I like it. And again, I'm keeping the needle on the edge of the fabric here, which is what applique is. You're driving to cover that raw edge. And then I'll stop here. So this is my blanket stitch, and it's actually a really nice stitch. But what I don't like about it for my design is it's too open. I prefer what I call a whisker stitch, which is stitch number 16. And it's kind of a bit more like a tree to me. So let me try this one. Now this stitch is a satin stitch, so it probably, for me to work this stitch, I have to keep the inside of the foot right on the edge of this fabric as the machine is stitching. I'll lock. And this is the stitch I want. I really think it does look like pine needles, and it's perfect for my Christmas tree. So I am going to use this stitch, but before I do that, I'll write on here 08 blanket, and I'm going to go 16, and I'm going to call it whiskers. I don't know if that's what it's officially called, but I reckon it looks like whiskers. So let's start stitching. And I'm going to start on a side again. The center part of the foot for applique will be aligned with the very raw edge of this fabric for decorative stitches. So that is what I'm going to do, keeping this aligned all the way around. As I got to the top of the Christmas tree, I stopped with the machine in center needle position. That is so I can turn the tree all the way around, and so I've spun the block all the way around so that I can stitch down this side. So it's given me the correct alignment to do the other side, and I'll do it the same on this corner down the bottom. That's the Christmas tree stitched. A couple of things that I've done here is when I have got to the end, I have made sure that they just kiss, the stitches kiss, before I stopped stitching. And you can see pretty much this is a very forgiving stitch. If I went crooked, you wouldn't notice. But it's also covered the very bottom of the trunk, which is the part that I was explaining that it didn't matter that you could see those beginning of these stitches because the decorative stitches covered it. So that is that block completely stitched. The next thing I would do is I would pull off my tearaway off the back, throw that in the rubbish, and for some reason I've got two lots. The next step is to embellish the block. To do that, I have still got my star and I have my glitter sheet. Now, this is probably going to go against everything that you have ever seen, and you'll be just going, Rachel, what are you doing? But this is my glitter sheet with the protective layer. And I'm going to put my star on top of this, and I'm just going to iron it like this. Now, the reason that I do this is the glue will stick to the protective layer, but it allows me to cut it out, and I don't have to worry. I'm going to use these scissors. I don't have to worry about that layer because it's not going to be stuck on the quilt. It actually gets pulled away, but it gives me a perfect shape to cut out a star. Okay, I'm going to take my protective sheet off my perfectly cut star, maybe. There it is. And that's actually quite sticky, so I'll just pop that in the rubbish. Throw these away. Then I'm going to iron my star on top. So I have to figure out which way she will go. So I'm just going to press my glitter sheet. I've grabbed my applique mat and it's going to iron. And it's not quite stuck. I'll go this way and then I'll flip her over. Pull off a bit of my Softway and apply a bit of heat here as well. It does have a glue on the back that needs to adhere. It's perfect. So that is the tree block complete, except for the rest of the embellishments. Some of them I have to hand stitch, so I'm not going to get to finish that today on film. But what I did want to show you is you can use any sort of ribbon or embellishments for creating your tree. And I've got some lovely buttons here, so let me just, some sequins. So I could use anything, really. So this, see, I don't love that. I'm not sure what you think, but that's not my favourite. Don't think it brings out the colours. I think this one would bother me because the sequins don't match the blue up here, but it's kind of funky. Don't love that. I think I do like this. I quite like this set of beading. It would have to be hand sewn on if I wanted to use this, but I'm not sure. I might try and find some blue ribbon and sew it on, see if I can get something to match that. And then I could put the buttons on at each point, which might be a good option for me. So embellishment is all about raiding your stash and seeing what you've got available to use to add dimension or interest to your applique. It's really cool and it's fun to see if you can use up some of those things. I'm going to go and do that now and then stitch another 3 blocks so I can make something like this. Cool wall hanging for Christmas. Happy sewing!